The wind screamed like a living thing over the barren Wyoming plains, clawing at the lone figure who stood at the edge of the tracks. Ayanna, running wolf, tightened her grip on the faded leather satchel slung over her thin shoulder. The dark braid, that fell like a shadow down her back, whipped violently in the gusts. Her worn moccasins crunched on the frost-bitten gravel as the monstrous iron beast roared into Bitter Creek, trailing smoke like some dying god. No one greeted her. The townsfolk gathered in tight knots along the platform, silent, watching her, as though she carried plague. The sun hung low, bleeding orange and crimson across the vast sky. Her heart thudded with both dread and determination. From within the crowd stepped the man from the letters. Horace Bentley, soft hands, pasty skin, a sagging suit that looked too fine for Bitter Creek. His thin lips curled downward the moment. His eyes swept over her weathered features, the fine lines at the edges of her deep brown eyes, the proud, unbowed lift of her chin. "I wrote for a bride. You—" He scoffed, sneering openly now. "You're too old, and you're not what I was promised." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Ayanna stood frozen, the paper crumpled in her hand. She could still feel the weight of hope when she had first held that same paper back on the reservation. Now it burned. "I came," she said softly. "You asked for someone who would stand by you." Bentley barked a bitter laugh. "I wanted a pretty little thing, not some weathered squaw. I'll not be mocked by my neighbors. Get back on the train, woman." Ayanna straightened. The muscles of her jaw clenched, but her voice stayed calm, sharp as the winter wind. "I will not beg." The crowd parted slightly as she stepped off the platform. Her boots whispered through the dust of the forgotten town. Children stared. Mothers pulled them closer. She walked on, her dignity a shield against the stares and cruel whispers that sliced like knives. A lean figure leaned against a wooden post near the general store, shadowed under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. Levi Boone watched in silence. The lines of age and regret etched deep into his sun-darkened face. His gray eyes followed her lonely procession with something colder than pity. Recognition. Guilt. The past had sent her here, and he had seen, too, many pasts. As twilight settled, Ayanna climbed the hill beyond the church and found the shack. Abandoned, with cracked windows and a door that hung crooked on one hinge, she stepped inside. The bare boards creaked like bones underfoot. A single rusted stove crouched in the corner like a forgotten animal. She slid to the floor, sat in the deepening darkness, and for the first time since leaving her people, allowed the tears to come. The next morning brought no kindness. She approached the grocer for flour. The man spat near her feet. The dressmaker laughed when Ayanna asked about work. In the saloon, a man flicked a coin at her and called her old maid savage. She let the coin lie in the dust and walked. Levi Boone followed at a distance, unseen. His memory returned like the sting of a whip, fires in the distance, the smell of burning lodges, screaming women, soldiers laughing over their victories. He had been a scout once, wearing blue and hunting those like her. That debt had never been paid. At dusk, Boone walked out to her shack. He laid a bundle of supplies against the door, a sack of flour, a jar of beans, a tin of coffee. Then he walked away into the darkness before she could answer. The door creaked open a moment later. Ayanna stared at the bundle in disbelief. Her fingers traced the rough burlap, then tightened into fists. 2 days passed. At the well near the blacksmith's, she drew water, the handle biting cold against her raw palms. Footsteps crunched behind her. Boone's voice came low, almost reluctant. "You plan on surviving out here alone?" She did not turn. "I have survived worse." "I know." His words froze her. Slowly she turned to look at him. His weathered face gave nothing away, yet something unreadable flickered behind the steel-gray eyes. "You know nothing of me," she said sharply. "I know. Enough." He adjusted the worn belt of his duster, eyes on the horizon. "Name's Levi Boone. I was at Wounded Creek, scout for the 5th Cavalry." The bucket slipped from her hand and splashed into the dust. Ayanna stared. "You?" He nodded once, heavy with shame. "I watched them drive you from your land. I did nothing. I was young and stupid." I watched the soldiers laugh. Her jaw tightened. For a long moment neither moved. Finally Ayanna bent, retrieved the bucket. "You cannot undo it." "No, but maybe I can keep you safe now." The wind tugged at her braid. She studied him for a long time, as if weighing every word he had spoken. Then she turned and walked away, the bucket sloshing against her skirts. Levi Boone remained behind, watching the small figure walk back toward the lonely shack, knowing there was a storm coming and that it would not spare either of them. In the saloon that night, Marshal Silas Kane stood by the window, watching Boone from afar. The gold star glinted on his chest. His lip curled in contempt as he downed a shot of whiskey. Boone always did like lost causes, he muttered darkly. The bottle slammed down on the worn oak counter. Let's see how long this one lasts. The wide Wyoming sky bled out the last of the dying sun. Somewhere far off, a lone wolf howled. Bitter Creek braced for the reckoning neither it nor its people could yet name. The morning haze lay over Bitter Creek like an old, damp quilt. Ayanna Running Wolf stood at the cracked window of her leaning shack, arms crossed over her chest. Breath hung in thin clouds before her lips. Across the frost-bitten meadow, the town stirred to life with a rhythm that did not include her. Horses' hooves clopped against hardened mud. Distant iron hammers rang from the smithy. Wagons creaked past with faces that never turned her way. She cinched the worn belt tighter around her waist. Her moccasins whispered against splintered floorboards as she stepped out into the cold. The ground was brittle and cracked, like the life she'd been forced to rebuild once again. Down at the mercantile, she waited behind a line of settlers. No one spoke. When her turn came, the grocer stared coldly. His meaty hand covered the scale as if fearing contamination. "I'd like sugar and flour," she said softly. He pointed to a crudely written sign. "We don't sell to redskins." Her hands tightened at her sides. The silence behind her grew, thick and hot like August dust. With a single nod, she turned and walked out. Later, she knelt beside the river south of town, washing the dirt from the bundle of wild onions she'd gathered. The frigid current tugged at her hands like a living thing. Across the bank, under the crooked skeleton of an old cottonwood, a rider sat astride a scarred bay gelding. He watched her without moving. Levi Boone sat tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, face set like the ridges in the distant hills. When she lifted her gaze to meet his, neither blinked. Then, with a small tug of the reins, he turned away. Ayanna climbed the bank, her skirt heavy with water. The sun had slipped behind a bank of dark clouds and the air hung heavy. The walk back was long. With each step, she felt the weight of the stairs that followed her. The third night, she found the fresh-cut wood stacked neatly by her door. She stared down at it for a long time, then slowly bent to gather a few logs. The next morning, a sack of dried beans appeared. The morning after that, a small tin of coffee. No note, no footprints to track. On the fourth day, she caught him. Boone had just stepped away from her porch with another burlap bundle when she rounded the corner of the shack. His broad shoulders stiffened. He set the bag down and straightened. "You." Boone's head tilted. "Didn't figure you for one to be caught unaware." Ayanna's brow furrowed. "Why?" He shifted uncomfortably, hands hooking into the worn leather belt at his waist. Figure it's the least I could do. Town don't give you much welcome. I didn't ask for help. No, ma'am, you didn't. His voice was gravel, soft and weathered. But sometimes it ain't about what's asked. They stood in tense silence. The wind tugged at the hem of her shawl. You know they'll come for you too, she warned. His expression didn't change. I know. The days passed. Ayanna worked the land behind her shack, breaking the hard soil with the dull iron plow salvaged from the scrap pile. Boone watched from a distance, from his horse high on the ridge, never intruding. At dusk, sometimes he rode by and nodded once. She never answered. The trouble came as summer bled into autumn. Ayanna walked back toward town after gathering roots. From the hills, the sun was setting, casting long, cruel shadows. A sharp voice split the quiet. Well, if it ain't the old squaw playing farmer. 3 men blocked the narrow trail ahead. Ranch hands, dirty canvas coats, whiskey breath, thick as molasses. The leader, a rat-faced man with a missing front tooth, spat in the dust. You lost, Injun? Or just too dumb to know where you don't belong? She held her ground, silent. Not much to say, huh? The man stepped closer, fingers brushing, the revolver at his side. Maybe we teach you some manners. Before she could move, the sharp crack of a Winchester echoed off the ridgeline. The bullet bit into the dirt inches from the man's boots. Next one won't miss. Levi Boone emerged from the rising dust, rifle leveled steady as stone. His eyes burned under the brim of his hat. The ranch hands backed away, curses falling. Like leaves, Boone rode down slow, dismounted, and approached her. The rifle remained in his grip, loose but ready. You all right? Ayanna nodded stiffly, eyes dark and unreadable. I don't need a savior. Boone studied her for a moment, then gave the faintest of smiles. Good. I'm no one's. They walked back together, neither speaking. The sound of boots crunching dirt and the whisper of distant prairie grass filled the void. At her shack, she paused at the door. Why do you care? The question hung between them like the last stubborn leaf of autumn. I once believed a man could outrun what he's done, Boone said quietly. Turns out you can only ride in circles. Maybe I'm tired of riding. She stared at him, searching for the lie that didn't come. Then without a word she stepped inside and closed the door gently. In town the saloon windows glowed like fiery eyes in the dark. Inside, Silas Kane leaned back in his chair, boots up on the table, fingers drumming a lazy rhythm. So Boone wants to play hero. Kane chuckled to the men around him. Let's see how long he stays standing when I knocked the pedestal out from under him. The laughter in the room was low and bitter, like the growl of a cornered wolf. Outside, the wind carried the first hint of winter, curling down from the mountains like a warning. The land held its breath. The reckoning had only just begun. The first snow came early to Bitter Creek. Flakes drifted silently across the wide plain, dissolving against the cracked leather of Ayanna's boots as she trudged along the frozen trail. The weight of the woven basket tugged at her arms, filled with wild roots and berries pulled from the stingy earth. Clouds like gunmetal hung low over the jagged ridges. Boone had warned her not to walk alone after dark. She had ignored him. The faint snap of a twig halted her, breath caught in her chest. The wind carried no scent, no voice, only stillness. Her hand slid to the handle of the worn hunting knife strapped at her side. Then came the voices. 3 men, laughter thick and sour. With whiskey, she recognized the leader by the guttural rasp of his drawl. Ratface, the same ranch hand who had cornered her weeks before. She's out here, Ratface sneered. Boone ain't around to save you now, squaw. The basket hit the dirt. Ayanna spun, blade flashing under the pale moonlight. They moved like wolves, teeth bared, confidence rising in the cold air. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her stance remained still, grounded. The first man lunged. Ayanna sidestepped, sliced along his forearm. He howled and stumbled back. The second grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms as Ratface approached. Time to teach you your place. The sound cut through the darkness like lightning splitting an ancient tree. The sharp report of a rifle cracked the night. The man holding her collapsed, gasping as blood spread warm against the snow. Another shot. Ratface spun backward and crumpled. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Boone stepped from the black curtain of trees, long rifle smoking faintly in his calloused hands. The third man bolted into the dark, boots slapping frantically against the hard ground. Boone moved to her side, scanning the shadows. "You hurt?" She shook her head slowly, chest heaving with shock and cold. "Come on." His hand wrapped firmly around her arm, pulling her away from the body sprawled like discarded rags. They walked without speaking under the full judgment of the cold Wyoming moon. At his cabin, Boone stoked the fire high. Orange light flickered across the rough-hewn walls. Ayanna sat rigid, knife still clenched white in her fist. Boone knelt beside the stove, back turned, giving her space. Finally, she spoke. "They would have killed me." His voice came low and tight. "Not while I draw breath." The flames crackled between them. Shadows danced like restless spirits. "You should not have come," she whispered bitterly. Boone looked up slowly, the deep lines of his face hardened. "I gave you my word." She stared at him long, searching, as if trying to carve through the weathered exterior to the man beneath. Her shoulders slowly relaxed. The knife slipped from her fingers onto the worn wood floor. Word of the shooting spread fast. Bitter Creek woke to hushed conversations and sideways glances. Boone rode into town at dawn, rifle slung across his back, hat pulled low. The saloon door creaked open under his calloused hand. Kane stood behind the bar, polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. The gold star pinned to his chest caught the morning light like a shard of ice. "I hear you killed 2 of my men," Kane said casually. Boone stopped just inside the doorway. His voice, when it came, was cold as the wind off the high ridges. "They weren't yours. They came for a woman. They paid the price." The saloon fell dead silent. Men froze with cards, half dealt. Whiskey glasses hovered halfway to lips. Kane's smile never reached his eyes. "Careful, Boone. You're meddling in things you don't understand." Boone stepped forward. His boots thudded slow and steady against the floorboards. "Understand. This. You or anyone lays a hand on her again, you won't get a warning shot." The 2 men stared at each other. The years of shared battlefield blood meant nothing now. The line had been drawn. Boone turned on his heel and walked back into the blinding white sunlight. Kane's glass exploded against the far wall, thrown with sudden fury. That night, Boone found Ayanna repairing the chicken coop behind his cabin. He approached quietly, watching the calm determination in the set of her shoulders. "You can't stay here," Boone said at last. She didn't turn. "I have nowhere else." He exhaled slowly, breath misting in the sharp cold. "Then you stay at my place. I'll fix up the lean-to, safer near my land." Now she did turn. Her dark eyes locked with his. "You owe me nothing. I owe myself something." Ayanna studied him for a long time. Then, with a small nod, she gathered the few possessions she had and followed him. The lean-to became her refuge. Simple, bare, warm. Boone kept his distance, as much from honor as from fear of what he felt building between them. As days passed into weeks, they worked side by side. She mended fences and carried water. He hunted game and taught her to handle the rifle with the same respect he did. They spoke little, but the silence between them softened, became companionable. Boone would catch himself watching the way her hair caught fire under the sunset, the way she moved through the land like she belonged to it. One evening, Ayanna stood at the corral, stroking the flank of Boone's old bay gelding. The sky blazed crimson and gold behind her. "Why do you still carry the guilt?" she asked without turning. Boone leaned on the fence, staring out toward the endless open plains. "Because I earned it." She shook her head gently. "You were young. You had no choice." His laugh was short and bitter. "There's always a choice." Ayanna faced him fully. "Then choose differently now." Boone met her gaze. Something unspoken, fragile but unyielding, passed between them. Across Bitter Creek, Kane loaded bullets into the cylinder of his Colt, the click of metal against metal echoing through the empty jailhouse. His lips curled in a grim smile as he whispered to the cold iron, "Let's see what you're made of, Boone." The wind raced down from the mountains that night, rattling windows and moaning through the barren streets. Trouble was coming. No one needed to say it. The land itself could feel it. The cold had teeth now. Dawn clawed pale streaks of light across the jagged peaks as Ayanna stood with a bucket in hand, her breath rising in soft plumes. She moved through the daily chores with steady precision, breaking ice from the water trough, feeding the restless horses, patching the gaps where winter wind found its way through weathered boards. Boone watched from a distance, leaning against a fence post, his arms crossed tightly against the morning chill. The ranch was quiet, a rare peace hanging over the land like thin glass, fragile and uncertain. Boone stepped forward finally, his boots leaving prints in the frost-hardened dirt. "You work too hard," he said. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "The land doesn't care how tired I am. It still needs tending." Boone gave a faint nod. No arguing with truth. He reached out, wordlessly lifting the heavy sack of feed from her arms and slinging it over his own shoulder. She let him, just this once. The days had fallen into an uneasy rhythm. The ranch became their island, cut off from the poisonous looks of Bitter Creek. The lines between protector and protected blurred slowly, quietly, like river ice thinning in spring. They never spoke of what grew in the spaces between their conversations. One evening, as the sky faded to indigo and the first stars blinked cold and distant, Ayanna sat by the fire, weaving an intricate pattern of beads and sinew. Boone watched from his chair, his battered coffee mug warming calloused hands that had known too much war and too little peace. "You never told me about your people," Boone said, voice low, respectful. Ayanna's fingers paused, the half-finished pattern dangling between them. The fire cracked. "I am Lakota," she answered. "We were called Sioux by others. We do not use that word. My family was from the Rosebud lands before the soldiers came." Boone stared into the flames. "I rode with them. I saw the flags, the burning lodges." Her voice remained calm, but the air tightened. "Then you know why we have no home now." Boone set his cup down, eyes heavy with old grief. "I was young, thought duty meant something. I never raised a rifle on a woman or child, but I rode with the men who did. That stains a man worse than blood." The fire threw shadows across the worn lines of his face. Ayanna studied him for a long time. "You left," she said softly. "Most wouldn't have. I was too ashamed to stay. You're still here." Boone looked up, startled by her words. A trace of warmth flickered behind the guarded steel of his expression. Snow drifted outside as another silence settled. This one didn't sting as much as before. The next day, they worked side by side, mending fence posts snapped by the last storm. Boone taught her how to brace the posts deeper, how to string the wire tighter so it wouldn't sag under the weight of snowdrifts. In turn, Ayanna showed him how to read the tracks of deer in soft mud, how to spot where water still ran beneath the ice, where herbs for winter fever grew hidden in the rocks. They spoke little, but the trust came anyway, brick by slow brick. Late afternoon found them at the ridge overlooking Bitter Creek. The town looked small from up here, distant and insignificant beneath the endless sweep of prairie and sky. Ayana wrapped her shawl tighter. "The land remembers everything," she murmured. Boone's eyes followed the horizon. "I know." They rode back in companionable quiet. The wind whispered secrets neither dared speak aloud. At the barn, Boone suddenly reached out and caught the reins of her horse before she could dismount. "Stay." His voice came rough, edged with something raw. "You don't have to go back to that shack." Ayana stiffened. "I am not your responsibility. I don't want it to be about that." The admission hung naked between them. She dismounted anyway and walked past him toward the house. At the door she paused, turning just enough for the firelight to catch the curve of her cheek. Then, let it not be. That night, Boone found sleep impossible. The wind battered the shutters like restless spirits demanding entry. He stared at the low ceiling beams of his cabin and listened to the distant howling of wolves. Morning brought the answer in the form of boot tracks in the snow, leading toward the barn. Boone followed them warily, rifle resting in his hands. Inside, Kane's warning had arrived. The gelding lay gutted, its blood a dark smear against white drifts. Tacked to the barn door with a hunting knife was a note scrawled in jagged ink. "Leave by sunrise, or next time it's her." Boone's knuckles whitened on the rifle, the old rage boiled up like an unwelcome friend. He stormed back toward the house. Ayana stood at the woodpile, splitting logs with measured, brutal precision. The axe fell again and again, each strike, sending chips flying into the snow. Boone strode up, holding the note in shaking hands. She read it calmly, then handed it back. "We knew this would come," she said. His voice rasped low. "We ride at dawn." "I'm not running," she answered fiercely. "We live to fight another day." She gazed at him long and hard, then nodded slowly. "Then we ride." As the last light bled from the winter sky, Boone saddled the single remaining horse. Ayana packed only what mattered. The wind screamed warnings that fell on deaf ears. From the ridge, Kane watched their tiny cabin below, his deputies tightening the cinches on cold-bitten saddles, revolvers gleaming under the moonlight. His grin stretched cruel and thin. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we finish this." The land waited, silent and still under its heavy white blanket, knowing the blood to come would melt the snow before the sun ever had a chance. The sky cracked pale gray as the first light of dawn crawled over the horizon. Breath steamed in heavy clouds from Boone's lips as he cinched the saddle tight beneath the restless bay mare. Ayana emerged from the cabin, rifle slung over her shoulder, her dark braid twisted tight against the cold wind. Neither spoke. Words would only weigh them down now. The sound of hooves echoed faint across the empty fields. They rode out under the skeletal cottonwoods, their shadows long and thin across the frost-bitten earth. Bitter Creek lay ahead, still and watchful, like a vulture waiting to feed. The main street stretched out, deserted but alive with expectation. Curtains shifted behind frosted panes. Boone scanned the alleyways and rooftops, feeling eyes track their every movement. Ayana sat tall in the saddle, expression unreadable, hands steady on the reins. Kane stepped from the sheriff's office, coat flapping lazily in the wind. His deputies fanned out behind him, forming a crooked line of cold steel and grim faces. Kane's gold star caught the morning light, glinting like the eye of some waiting predator. Boone swung down from the saddle, slow and deliberate. The leather creaked loudly in the hush. "Last chance, Boone," Kane called, voice carrying sharp and clear. "You walk away now, we let you both ride out. No hard feelings." Ayana's boots touched the ground beside Boone's. She moved. With the silent grace of the mountains themselves, rifle held low, but ready. Boone's reply came low and deadly calm. "We leave when we choose, not when you say." Kane's smile twisted into something colder. "So be it." The street erupted. In gunfire, bullets tore splinters from the hitching posts and sent clouds of dust spinning into the bitter air. Boone dragged Ayanna behind the overturned water trough, returning fire with brutal precision. 2 of Kane's men fell, sprawling awkwardly, into the snow. The acrid bite of gunpowder filled the air. Ayanna fired once, twice, a third time, each shot measured, deliberate. Another deputy fell with a sharp cry. Boone ducked back, breathing hard. "They'll circle us." Ayanna's jaw tightened. "Let them come." The sharp crack of rifles echoed through the narrow alleyways as the fight raged on. Boone's shoulder jerked violently as a bullet slammed into flesh. He stumbled, gritting his teeth, blood darkening his coat sleeve. "Boone." Ayanna pulled him deeper into cover, her eyes flashing with fury and fear. She tore a strip from her shawl, binding the wound with quick, practiced hands. "Just a scratch," he muttered through clenched teeth. The shooting paused suddenly. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Then Kane's voice rose, mocking and cold. "You can't hold out forever, Boone. Town's ours. You're just a relic that forgot to lie down." Boone's breath came ragged. Ayanna placed the rifle into his good hand and took his revolver. She rose slowly, standing tall in the open street. Silhouetted against the pale dawn sky, her voice carried clear as a bell. "You call him a relic. I call him a man." A stunned hush swept the street. Kane frowned, momentarily thrown off balance. "You want this over?" Ayanna shouted. "Then face me." Kane stepped forward, brushing his coat aside to reveal the polished grip of his Colt. His boots crunched against the snow as he squared off with her. Boone tried to stand but sagged back against the trough, pain gnawing at him like wolves on a carcass. His vision blurred as Ayanna and Kane faced each other in the empty street. The wind held its breath. Kane sneered, hand hovering over his holster. "You don't have the nerve." Ayanna stared, unmoved. "I've had to have nerve since the day they burned my people's lodges." The church bell gave a single cold clang. Kane's hand flashed toward his gun. Ayanna didn't hesitate. Her borrowed revolver barked twice. The first shot shattered the iron star on Kane's chest. The second slammed into his thigh, dropping him hard onto the frozen mud. Kane writhed, clutching at his leg, gasping in disbelief. His deputies froze. Without their leader, their resolve drained away like water from a cracked barrel. Slowly, rifles lowered, and boots retreated into the shadows. Ayanna approached, standing over the fallen marshal. Her breath misted above him as he spat curses and blood into the snow. "You'll hang for this?" he growled. "No," she replied quietly. "Not today. I won't become what you are." She struck him hard with the barrel of the revolver, knocking him cold. Then she holstered the gun and turned back to Boone, who slumped exhausted but alive against the trough. The townsfolk crept from their homes and businesses, watching in stunned silence as Ayanna helped Boone to his feet. An old rancher tipped his hat solemnly. "Reckon that's the first time someone stood up to Kane and lived." Boone leaned heavily on her shoulder. "Told you, she's got more guts than the lot of us." They walked away from the bloody street together, neither saying a word. The town parted silently, like the prairie grass before a strong wind. The sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting long golden beams across Bitter Creek. Snow melted where it touched. The land itself seemed to exhale at last. The wind softened as they left the edge of Bitter Creek behind. The land unfolded before them in quiet acceptance, tall grass shivering faintly beneath the blue sweep of the endless sky. Boone leaned heavily in the saddle, teeth clenched against the fire burning through his wounded arm. Ayanna rode close, every movement sharp and deliberate, scanning the ridges with wary eyes. The echoes of gunfire still haunted the back of her mind, the smell of cordite and blood not yet washed away by distance. The trail wound through dry creek beds and jagged outcroppings. Coyotes yipped distantly from the dark folds of the hills. Boone's breathing grew shallow and ragged. Finally, Ayanna pulled up beside a weathered stand of cottonwoods and slid from her horse. Without a word, she helped Boone down and lowered him carefully against the cool trunk. "You should have left me," Boone rasped. "I didn't." Ayanna moved quickly, tearing strips from her underdress and binding the wound tighter. Boone winced, then forced a crooked smile through gritted teeth. Stubborn woman. She pressed her palm gently against his forehead. The heat rising off him warned of fever. "I learned from you." The horses grazed quietly nearby as she built a small fire. Boone lay motionless, eyes flickering between sleep and pain. Ayanna crushed wild herbs between her fingers, mixing them into water and pressing the bitter brew to his lips. He drank without protest. Night fell hard across the plains. Stars spilled out in a cold blaze across the sky. The flames snapped and danced, casting long, shifting shadows over the two silent figures at the edge of the world. Boone's voice finally broke the quiet. "I never told you about the woman I loved once." Ayanna stirred the fire with a branch, but didn't answer. Her name was Eliza, daughter of a preacher back in Kansas, sweet as spring rain. "I went off to war thinking I'd come back a hero." His words faltered. "I came back different." She saw it. Couldn't live with what I'd become. She married someone else. Ayanna listened, her eyes distant. "I never thought I'd feel something again. Not until I saw you walk off that train in Bitter Creek." The silence held between them like something alive. The fire cracked. "You don't owe me that," Ayanna said quietly. "I don't say it because I owe. I say it because it's true." Boone shifted painfully, wincing. "You've carried your own burdens longer than I ever did." The first soft streaks of dawn began bleeding over the horizon. Ayanna stood and walked to the ridge, gazing out over the endless prairie rolling away into the distance. Boone's voice drifted to her. "Do you ever think about leaving?" She answered without turning. "I have no place left to go." "Yes, you do." The weight of his words fell heavily. Slowly she walked back to him and knelt. Her fingers traced over the battered brim of his hat. "You don't understand what it means for me to stay with you." Boone chuckled weakly. "I understand more than you think." In the soft gold of early morning, they rode again, slow and steady, Boone swaying weakly in the saddle. They crested the final rise above Boone's ranch, just as the first real warmth of spring touched the earth. Smoke curled gently from the cabin's chimney. The town had changed. Kane's men had scattered, their power broken. The townsfolk, once silent, had stepped forward in small ways. A new sheriff had been named. No, one stopped them as they passed through the main street. Heads dipped respectfully, hats touched in quiet acknowledgement. The ghost of fear no longer haunted their eyes. At the ranch, Ayanna helped Boone from the saddle and into the chair on the porch. He sat back, breathing hard, the familiar view of endless open land stretching before him. Ayanna sat beside him. For the first time, the weight between them felt less heavy. "Will you stay?" Boone asked, voice low. She smiled faintly, gazing out at the swaying grass. "I will stay." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun climbed higher. The land around, them exhaled, the long winter finally loosening its grip. Weeks passed. Boone's strength returned slowly, though the wound left him favoring his left side. Ayanna planted herbs and vegetables in the tilled patch of earth behind the cabin. Together they repaired the broken fences, drove cattle, and rode the boundaries of the land they now shared. The bond between them grew in the small things, the passing of a tool in quiet understanding, the soft laughter when a stubborn mule refused to cooperate, the unspoken trust of long rides beneath the stars. On a late, spring evening, as golden light bathed the plains, Boone stood in the doorway watching Ayanna work with the horses. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "I may never deserve you." Ayanna turned, brushing loose strands of hair from her face. She crossed the yard and stood before him, laying her hand gently over his heart. Deserve has nothing to do with love. For the first time in years, Boone allowed the weight he carried to lift. He drew her into a soft, careful embrace, the pain and regret melting into something quiet and whole. The ranch stood firm against the rolling winds. The town of Bitter Creek endured, now marked by the memory of a woman who had defied cruelty, and a man who had found redemption beside her. As summer stretched out across the plains, two figures rode side by side along the ridge, silhouetted against the boundless western sky. The world ahead was uncertain, but they faced it together. The wind caught Ayanna's long braid and Boone's battered hat, pulling both toward the wide promise of the horizon. They did not look back.